In this next module, we're going to be introduced to Senior English as it sits in the VCE, as well as within the VCAL program. On this slide, you can see the enrolment statistics for a range of English subjects as released by the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. So students need to be enrolled in different subjects in their VCE. And the first four here, VCE English, VCE Literature, VCE English as an additional language, and VCE English language, these are all taken from Unit 4, so the second half of Year 12. You can see that VCE English is the clear winner here as the most popular English subject that students will take within their Year 12 year. And it's also the biggest subject within the state of all the VCE studies. This is why it is going to be very important for us to ensure that you have a really good understanding of VCE English study design, the teaching and learning activities that would occur within VCE English, as well as the assessment, because more than likely within your first few years of teaching, you would be given a Unit 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 English class, just because of the sheer numbers that you can see there. You can also see the other Englishes that are available, and we also see there VCE Foundation English with 1,172 students. It's a reasonable amount within the state. This subject is only offered Units 1 and 2. There's no 3 and 4 sequence for this subject. And we'll talk a little bit later on where this subject may lead. We can see the last subject here, the VCAL subject, that there's 23,000 odd students enrolled in VCAL within the state. All of these students to get a VCAL certificate must study English in some description. Some of these students will choose to study one of the VCE Englishes as listed here, but probably the majority will study VCAL literacy units and have to pass these components, and we will look briefly at these today, and then a module later on in the semester we will learn about VCAL literacy. So in this slide we're looking at the requirements needed for the Victorian Certificate of Education, the VCE. For students to attain a VCE certificate, they must have a minimum of 16 units. Now, a unit is semester based, so in that case the minimum that students would study would be 4 subjects over the 2-year period. Generally, students study Units 1 and 2 in Year 11 and Units 3 and 4 in Year 12. Some students may start a Unit 1 and 2 subject in Year 10 and then complete that in Year 11 if they choose to do that. The reason why English is so important within the VCE certificate is that to attain a VCE certificate, students must pass a minimum of 3 units, and they're allowed to select these from any of the English subjects. So the majority of students probably, as we can see, would choose English Units 1, 2, 3 and 4. If they did fail one of these units, they would still be able to attain their VCE certificate, but they would have to ensure that they pass the other 3 units. Students don't necessarily need to choose Units 1 to 4 of the same English subject. So for example, they may choose Unit 1 Literature, decide that's not really the subject for them, and then Unit 2 English Language, and they may continue that into Year 12, but they could also do Units 3 and 4 of straight English. There isn't actually prerequisites for the Year 12 English subjects. It would be advisable to have a concurrent study within the one area, but students may do a variety of things. We can see there that Foundation English is only offered at the Unit 1 and 2 level. So students may study this and get an apprenticeship at the end of the year, they may decide to go into English in Year 12 and do 3 and 4 of English, or they may decide to go into a VCAL program and study literacy when they're at the Year 12 equivalent period. We can also see there that we've got English as an additional language. To qualify for English as an additional language, students need to have done in the last 7 years their studies in English instruction, and they have to actually apply to qualify for this subject. So students' abilities within that subject can range quite a bit. Yes, but they're the English subjects that can be chosen. So I suppose the reason why English acts as such an important subject within the VCE is obviously that reasons that you have to have 3 units to get a VCE certificate. But to actually get a ATAR score, the English subject, the best English subject that students are studying, the highest score, whatever subject that is, it has to be in their primary 4. So to make an ATAR score, we take the top 4 subjects and then 10% of a 5th and 6th subject. So even if students have a strength in mathematics and science subjects, they still do need to do really well in whatever English they choose in order to get that high ATAR score. Now, as I was saying about the 4 subjects make the ATAR score plus 10% of a 5th and 6th, students could technically study English language, literature and English, but only 2 of those would be within those primary 4 subjects to actually make an ATAR score. Many university courses as well have a minimum ATAR score for their course. So for example, students may need to achieve a 25 within English, or it could be a 30 within English as an additional language. So English acts as a very important subject within the VCE. Another very recent development is the VCE Baccalaureate. It's relatively new and it's been introduced as a way to encourage students to study mathematics and languages at a high level. Students don't apply for this, it's just automatically given to them if they study a mathematics, a language, and they achieve a score of 30 or above, a study score of 30 or above in English literature or English language, and a score of 33 or above in English as an additional language. So just a bit of an extra bit of knowledge about the importance of English within the VCE. And that is given in addition to their VCE certificate. So here we've got a list of all the different VCE Englishes, and they are quite different. VCE English, our big one, is the study of literary and media texts. So as you can see here, it encourages critical and creative thinking, and it really builds on the learnings within the Auswell's curriculum. So that's speaking and writing and reading, the real foundations there. VCE literature is text-based, literary text-based, so looks at literary criticism, and students respond both analytically and creatively in that subject. And it does require students to be quite capable readers. Both English and literature do study film as text, plays, and as well as novels and print texts, depending on what their teachers select. And there is rules that we'll talk a bit later on about what needs to be studied at a Year 12 level. English is an additional language, as I said before. Students need to qualify for that because of their English speaking background and their education in English. The study design you'll find is the same study design as for English. It's within the one document. The difference is there is a listening component, and some of the assessment is slightly different when we're looking at the analysis of media texts. English language is a linguistics-based subject. So it looks at the feature and structure of the way that written and spoken language is constructed, and also looks at social use of language. And finally, as I spoke about before, VCE Foundation English is only offered at Units 1 and 2, and it's more of a vocationally orientated subject. So really building up students' literary skills to improve reading comprehension. They still do study novels and things like that, but perhaps in a shorter version. So now that we've had a bit of a recap of the way that VCE is structured, English's place in that, I want you can pause here and have a bit of a think about these questions. So firstly, imagining you were 17 again and you got to make those choices. Which English would have you selected? Which would be most engaging for you? And what do you think you would have liked about it? Secondly, I want you to think about a student that you've encountered on your teaching rounds so far. Maybe a student that you've had in Year 8 or Year 10, or it could have been a VCE subject that you have taught this student in. From your knowledge of them, which English would you recommend if you were their course coordinator and all the Englishes were offered at the school that they're at? And why would this particular subject be most suitable and appealing for them? So, the way we know what to teach, the structure of what needs to be taught, and particular texts that need to be selected are all set out by the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. So you can Google the VCAA for different study designs and the text lists, and I have put links to those there as well for you. So the study design for each of the Englishes is a separate document, and it dictates the skills and the knowledge that students need to attain during the teaching and learning sequence of that unit. The study designs will also outline the nature and the length or the scope of the assessment tasks that the school needs to set. At Year 11 and 12, it is the school determines the way in which the assessment is conducted, because students at the ends of Unit 1 and 2 only achieve a satisfactory, an S, or a not satisfactory, an N. They will sit SACs and will be given the scores, but what actually goes to the VCAA is just this S and N, so the marks don't actually go towards the ATAR score. In Year 12, the SACs, or the school assessed coursework, is builds up so that it can be added to calculate a study score, which then calculates an ATAR score. And there's also external examinations. So during the year, for all of the English subjects, the school and the teachers assess and produce marks, and then there is an external exam that external examiners will actually mark. So as I said before, each study design consists of semester-based units, and each unit will contain areas of study and the skills and knowledge that students will need by the end of that area of study. The text lists are produced for Year 12, so Units 3 and 4, English. English is an additional language, and literature. And these texts will feature on the Year 12 exam. Schools are able to select texts from this list that they think are most suitable for their students, and perhaps also most suitable for their knowledge, and perhaps texts that they've had encountered at university or have some knowledge of. In Units 1 and 2, for English, EAL and literature, schools determine their own texts that they would like to select, and sometimes this can be a group of teachers at the school that would discuss possibilities. They may go to professional development and get ideas from there, or VATE, the English Association, they may have some ideas about particular texts, or textbooks sometimes are ways that texts would be generated. So these texts for the year 12 subjects are released the preceding year. So I've listed the 2017 text lists just for your knowledge for when you may be teaching this year. But the 2018 ones have already been released, and it is very important to make sure that you always check that the texts that you've got on your course outlines are the current ones for the study design and that current year. So the way each unit's structured, I've only got literature and English as examples here, and we can see in Unit 1 literature here that there are two outcomes. So if we're talking about an 18-week semester, more than likely you'd spend about 9 weeks on outcome 1 and 9 weeks on outcome 2. Similarly, in English, we can see the two outcomes there, the reading and creating text, and outcome 2, analysing and presenting argument. And similarly, you'd break those outcomes, into equal weight throughout the semester. Students must meet and satisfy to show the skills and knowledge of both outcomes to actually pass the unit. If you pass outcome 1 and not outcome 2, you will fail the unit. And these aren't determined necessarily by SACs. Students should be able to show their ability to show the skills and knowledge of those outcomes in other ways, so that if they do not be able to show those in a 2-hour essay that they need to write, they obviously will not get a very good mark for that, but it won't be determined whether it's satisfactory or not satisfactory for that outcome and consequently the unit. So we can see here that I've put a little bit more description of Unit 1 English and Area Study 1 and Area Study 2. And we can see that both of these areas of study have 2 assessment tasks. So if we're looking at the first one, Unit 1 English, Area Study 1, students are asked to produce an analytical and creative response to texts. So in this, they probably would study 2 texts. So they may study, for example, Macbeth and Gattaca, or it may be a text that has more similarity. Within that period, they'll need to write an analytical response, so a text essay, and they'd also need to write a creative response to the text. So they need to show both of those skills, and the teaching and learning would be building up that knowledge as well as obviously teaching the text. And then they would have 2 SACs in which they show that. Sometimes units may be broken up. So for example, if we were looking at assessment task 1A here, the analytical text response, that may be taught at the beginning of the semester, but the assessment task 1B may be right at the end of the semester, a creative response, just to break the whole semester up. We can also see here that Unit 1 English Area Study 2 analyse how argument and persuasive language can be used to position audiences and create their own texts intended to position audiences. Here again we've got 2 SACs. So one is an analysis of media articles and how the persuasive language and techniques is positioning the audience, and secondly a text intended to position an audience. So these in this case, one of those tasks actually has to be an oral task. And most often what schools would do, they'd probably pick 2B to be the oral task, because in Year 12, that task is the oral task. So usually, it's obviously not mandated, but usually it would be best to set students up so they have that practice in Year 11. So as we can see here, for Unit 1 English, there would be 4 SACs that students would do without the semester. Some schools also might have an exam at the end of the semester, but that isn't mandated in the study design. We could look at English language or literature or English as an additional language or foundation English, and the assessment structure is very much the same. Whereas there's the outcome description and the assessment tasks are laid out for you. So here is an example taken from, I think this is the literature study design, Unit 1 literature, and it outlines in dot points the key knowledge and key skills that students need to be able to understand from this unit. Often these may be learning intentions that are taken over a period of time. So this may be a learning intention over a week that you're focusing on a particular skill, or it might be a particular lesson. And it's very important that all of these things are covered. So sometimes when teachers are making their week-to-week planner, they would be picking out the dot points of study designs to make sure that they're actually covering those things. In English language, for example, which we'll look at a module later in the semester, as well as that, there's particular meta language that needs to be learned, and week by week it would be set out so that to ensure that students know all that content for the exam. So now, VCAL literacy. So the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning, students can get a certificate at either a foundation, intermediate or senior level. So some students will attain a foundation or intermediate certificate when they're in year 11 and a senior certificate at year 12. Some students will only attain a foundation certificate. It just does depend on the student's abilities, motivations, etc. Some students will have students studying VCE English subjects which count towards their VCAL course. So they won't actually be studying VCAL literacy, they might be studying Foundation English, or they could be studying literature or English language. It does depend on what subjects schools are able to offer, but probably in the majority of cases, students would be studying VCAL literacy. Sometimes VCAL literacy subjects are taught as completely separate subjects, and sometimes they're integrated within the VCAL program. So they may be taught with personal development skills, and there may be projects that would involve all these things, and it is very school dependent. We will look at VCAL and VCAL literacy particularly in a module later in the semester. So now we've had an opportunity to learn hopefully a little bit more about the different study options at Senior English within the VCE and the different subjects that are offered, the study designs that are associated with them and text lists, as well as the assessment ways in which the assessment works for those subjects. We've briefly looked at VCAL and how VCAL literacy would sit in those as well, and generally the way in which the VCE and VCAL are structured. So in a brief review, I would like you to jot down somewhere 3 key ideas that you've learnt from this information. And secondly, I'd like you to list 2 questions that you would like more information about after thinking about this material today. And I will ask you to post some of these ideas on a forum in a different spot. Thank you for listening to this week.